The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm here with Dr. Tom Tonkin. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. I look forward to the conversation. We already started. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now, Tom, just a quick little note. You're the CEO of the Conservatory Group, a management consulting firm where you help businesses with their management leadership and sales. You also have a doctor of philosophy in organizational leadership. And prior to starting your businesses, you spent many years kind of as a consultant and a director within different organizations. One of those organizations you're at for about 20 years, a company with a name quite well known around the world, Oracle. Let's maybe start our conversation formally. We were chatting before hit record there, and I want to try and bring some of that stuff back in because it was pretty fascinating. But
sure.
In terms of Oracle, what did you learn, in those 20 years? Are there any kind of principles or tactics or mindsets that you feel like really you still hold with you today and really play a big role or had a big impact in the success that you've experienced to this point?
I mean, I would be foolish not to say so. Absolutely. I'll tell you what's interesting is I think both Oracle and I grew up together because I took that job in 1996. Now, if you go back to that era, I think Oracle, from just a revenue perspective, to get some metrics out, I think they were probably less than $4 billion a year, maybe $3.5 billion, as I recall. Now, if you go and somebody listening on the podcast pulls up Google and types in ORCL as the symbol, the stock symbol, I think we're probably somewhere 45, 50 billion. Mm-hmm. So I think that alone tells you a lot about my experience because we grew up together. And for the longest time, and I have been out for about 6 years, but for the longest time there, we had a startup mentality, even though it was generating, in the billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. We had a startup mentality, a startup spirit, and the leadership there was very, very strong. And you could tell leadership really drove the success of the organization. Mm. So principle number one, leadership matters. And it sounds trivial or it sounds kind of mushy, but I saw it in action, and I saw it both ways. Oracle, we had our good times, we had our bad times, and it really did hinge upon leadership. Now, Larry Ellison has been and still continues to be the leader there, but you had other people, execution, lower level people in the organization that came and went, and some were good and some weren't so good. And the good news is, Larry is a very, very strong leader, and therefore Oracle continues to prosper. So overall, even you had those dips and, those peaks and valleys, you still had somebody at the helm that really made a difference. And I think the history there speaks for itself.
A quick question for you on that, because I really want to make this practical and actionable for everyone joining us. And I do want to really get to, how you now gone out on your own, grown your business. But take us back into those days when you were at Oracle. You mentioned that leadership was a really kind of powerful part of the growth and bringing people along. For all of the consultants and kind of consulting firm owners that are with us right now, who either actively are managing or thinking about building their team, what would you say? Like, take us back into those days in Oracle. Any stories or examples or things that your leaders, your kind of superiors, said to you that you feel really got you to rally around the team or to take action? Like, what stands out for you as part of that others might be able to implement themselves?
I do think that the heart of what I learned was to have strong values and not succumb to the pressures that would expose or compromise your values. There were times, and I'll be very open here and frank, I was back in the days when Larry himself would come to meetings and he would talk. And sometimes he would make a decision on something, and he was very open, and we would sort of raise our hand and say, well, why'd you make that decision? And he would start by saying something like, let's be clear, that decision was not easy. However, the values of the company or the values that I built this company are such that required me to make that very difficult decision.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me, because if you were to look at it, like most people, maybe most of your audience looks at other companies such as an Oracle, pick your Fortune 50 company, and you see potentially decisions that don't make sense. It was fun, and it was good for me to be in that room and hear that and say, yeah, at face value, that didn't make any sense. And you always say, well, it doesn't even look like you know what you're doing. And yet very much knew what he was doing, and he wasn't compromising on his values and beliefs. So if that's a principle in itself that your listeners can take away, is number one, do you have values and beliefs that actually shape your decisions? And do you find yourself having to compromise them to, short term, right? Sometimes people will compromise their values and beliefs because, I'll get that deal, or it'll be a short term to a long term. I could tell you now, after being in the business world, I consider myself a recovering executive. After all of these years, I could tell you that the long term always wins out, because guess what? There'll be another Q4. There'll be another fiscal year. There will be another client. And I think sometimes I work with sales a lot. And sometimes I think what happens is people try to sit there and go, well, I've got to do this for this particular quarter, or else, I don't make my number. I'm like, there's another quarter behind it, another quarter behind it. You don't want to compromise your values because of something short term. So that to me is principle number 2, right? It's this idea of long-term thinking over short-term thinking. And so often as entrepreneurs, what we like to call entrepreneurial consultants, is kind of our audience, people who are not just doing the consulting work, but they're actively thinking about building a business, right, that will grow and prosper and make a really big impact. But so often as entrepreneurs, we are very focused on like the immediate kind of present or just a little bit into the future, but not far enough. Like we really judge success based on what happens yesterday or today or maybe tomorrow, but we're not thinking about next year or the following year or 5 years from now, and allowing ourselves to kind of to grow into that. But the other thing that you mentioned around the values, that really resonates, because we as a company at Consulting Success have gone through this over the last little while, where we've really started to focus on our values. In fact, episode 200 of the podcast, my cousin and co-founder Sam came on and we talked about our values, and people can go to the Consulting Success website, the Our Story page, and you can see our kind of 4 values there that we really have put together. But I think very early on, I used to always feel that values were only for big companies like Oracle, right? It's not for the smaller, even one person consulting firm or a small team. Like you don't need it. But what I've really, realized is that having values is not only important if you want to build a team, but also just for the marketplace and your audience and those that you want to serve and make an impact on, like for them to know as well, because it's going to draw in more of the people that have those same values or shared values. And it'll help to keep away the people who, you probably wouldn't want to do business anyways. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Let's fast forward a little bit. So you had some great experiences, it sounds like, in and at Oracle. You mentioned about 6 years ago or so, you decided to kind of start your own entrepreneurial and kind of consulting journey. Talk to us a little bit about why you decide to leave the quote unquote, safety of corporate executive life and venture into the deadly forests and cliffs of the consulting world. I think it was like any other relationship, and it sounds silly, but we grew apart. Myself and Oracle. I have to tell you, when I left, I obviously left in great terms. They're a great company. They took care of me. They gave me some nice parting gifts. It was a nice departure. The reason I did that was, as I got older in life, there was just a few things I needed to do for myself. And they didn't necessarily coincide with any company, because I would have gone somewhere else if it would coincide that way. But I thought this is the time that I needed to do that, is to go do the things I need to do before I'm done.
Right.
And there's certain things I believe, certain things I want to leave behind, a legacy. I think everyone will come to that. I'm a little older than probably most of your listeners, but I'm here to tell you that eventually everyone gets there. And it's a question on what is it that you want to leave as your legacy.
Yeah. Tom, I don't think you're probably that much older than many of our listeners. We have a very diverse and wide-ranging group here from all around the world. So there's 2 things that come up for me as you mentioned that. The first is, you mentioned you left Oracle on very good terms. You left with, it sounds like, some nice benefits or some sort of a parachute or however you want to kind of describe it. what tips would you have for those who are joining us right now, who still are working in the corporate world? Maybe they have an executive role, whatever it may be, and they're actively thinking about making that transition into consulting. One of our studies that we did this year, we found that over 50% of consultants, one of their previous employers was actually their first consulting client. So that's kind of one just interesting data point that we identified in that study. I mean, I'm thinking more even kind of tactically, like, is there anything that you did in your conversations, relationships with Oracle, with your employer to make that transition more successful, or anything looking back that you think, oh, I wish I would have done that a little bit differently? What advice would you offer to those who are looking to make that transition?
I was there for almost 20 years. And so I knew a lot of people, because what happens at companies like Oracle is you kind of grow up and you take different paths in different companies. And much of the senior leadership there, I knew personally. And the reason I knew personally is because they weren't senior leaders the whole time, right? They were workers like me many years ago, and they just moved up. They were very successful. And so, of course, I maintain those relationships till this day. It's an important part. They can give you, they give you those introductions to other places. They could be your first customer, but I will tell you what they can be is certainly your biggest advocate. There's nothing more powerful than get a new customer and someone says, well, where have you done this? Or what kind of reference can you do? And you can go back and say, why don't you go back to my previous employer and ask them? I mean, that alone by itself means a lot, because sometimes I think us entrepreneurs and consultants on our own, I think sometimes we're painting with the paintbrush that, like, we're not happy and we left. Oh, we're going to go do our own thing. We're disgruntled and we're difficult to work with. And you and I both know that's not necessarily true. However, there's plenty of people who don't do what we do, who hire us, who want to know whether or not they're hiring somebody they can work with. There's nothing more powerful to say, why don't you talk to somebody that I worked with previously, specifically my previous employer, which I can do. I still do, and talk to many of those as well. I want to go back, though, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about the beliefs and the values and the mission and the vision. As a management consultant myself, one of my offerings is to help people do a vision and mission. Now, I have to tell you something. I think most companies out there do not utilize the vision and mission properly. I would say it's probably one of the least utilized, least effective tools in senior management's arsenal. I think part of it is because it's not done right. And I think we all walk away with this idea that it's like, oh, it's this mushy thing. We all get together, buy some lunch and talk about aspirational things. And then we go play golf, for the other half of the day. And unfortunately, there's many times that is true, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it's gotten to be a point so much that I have a personal vision and mission as a person. So it scales very nicely. And it gives you the ability to then make those decisions in the future, very much like I said earlier about your values and making decisions that are based on your values. You may kind of know what they are. You may kind of think of it, I would never lie, or I would never do this. But yet you're faced with a situation. I've been faced with that situation where someone tries and says, hey, you need to lie for, to be able to, better yourself, get this deal. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I never thought I'd be in this situation. Are you prepared? Do you have it written down? Do you have an understanding what your personal vision and mission, and therefore what your organizational vision and mission is? So that's another idea or principle if we go down the list for your listeners to think of is, I'm talking, fingers on keyboard, pencil on paper, and really get clarity. And let me give you the other side of the coin, and then I'll pause. There's another aspect of this that's almost contradictory. And it's something that I have now learned as an entrepreneur. Is one of the pieces of advice that I got before I became an entrepreneur is to have clarity on what it is that you want to do. Like, don't, just understand exactly what you're going to do before you take the big leap and leave the big safety net of corporate life. But one of the things that I came across is a pithy saying that I'll leave on the table for you to discuss is action creates clarity, not the other way around. You have to move. You have to do stuff to get that clarity. I don't believe, and this was the hard lesson that I've learned for the last 6 years. You don't sit down and go, okay, I'm clear. Let's go.
Yeah.
And then it seems like 5 minutes later, it's like, well, hold on a second, I'm not clear. And that's okay. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, right. You've got to move to get some clarity.
You're definitely on the right show, Tom, because we often use kind of share the phrase imperfect action. We're very big believers in this idea that you need to take action, right? Action is exactly as you described it, right? That's what creates clarity. That's what creates results. And people often hesitate to take action because they don't feel confident, because they want to be clear. But in fact, in order to get clear and in order to feel more confident, you must take action to see what works and what doesn't work. So let's come back to your story. So you left Oracle. What was the first thing that you did when you actually made the decision to start a consulting business? To kind of walk us through the first couple of clients. How did you go about landing those clients? Where did they come from? What did that look like?
I would venture to say, whether directly or indirectly, all of my clients come through my network.
Okay. And are you actively reaching out to your network? Is it? Yes. I mean, we hear stories of people who they'll leave their job. They send in maybe one email, or people just kind of find out that they've left the job and now they're busy for a year or whatever it might be. And at some point, the leads and inquiries kind of do start to slow down, and they have to start thinking about marketing their business. So walk us through, like, for you specifically, were you sending emails, making phone calls, like going to events? What were you doing to really leverage that network that you have?
So there's a little bit, I have to introduce this other part of the story that makes it very interesting. So during the beginning part of my consulting firm, I was approached by one of my networks to help build, I'm a PhD statistician. So I do a lot of I can build reliable, valid assessments and things like that. So that's one of the things I do. Mm. But I had somebody in my network came up to me and said, we want to create a networking assessment, right? How do people network, and how good are you a network? And give them what we called at the time an NQ, so a network quotient. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know what I didn't know, but I said, sure, yeah, well, I'll do it. And then, of course, through the rigorous process of interviewing people and doing the research and doing all the statistical analysis, I landed on an NQ. And like any old little good researcher, right, I went and took the assessment for myself and found myself to be not very good. So it was an eye opener. I don't necessarily know how important that was for me and for people in my position to understand networking. And because of that assessment, I started working on myself, started working on follow-up and follow-through and how to follow up and understanding influence and how do you influence people and how do you communicate with them better, right? Because it's not just picking up the phone and calling somebody, right? Networking, and maybe it hasn't hit anybody, but when my research, right, it is how do I talk to people? You can't talk to everybody the same way. You have to have some level of reciprocity that's connected into networking, meaning, right, I do something for you to do something for me, but not in an expectant kind of way. I think a lot of people, when they first get into network, goes, I know people. That's different than networking, number one. Number two, they pick up the phone and they just ask, right? They like, give me, as opposed to, giving to someone else right out of the gate. Like when I call somebody, when I network with somebody purposefully, I always have a reason, and I always bring value to the connection.
Can you offer an example of that? So let's say
yes.
Someone is with us right now and they're thinking, okay, I have people in my network I have not had a conversation with. I have not touched base with them for a period of time. Maybe it's been 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. What would be like just one action that you would recommend that they could take? And what would the language look like that you've found to be effective?
Well, I think the language has to be authentic. You can't sort of fabricate this thing. So let's say, for example, and by the way, I'm a big reader. I'm a big researcher, just in general. I think all of us as consultants need to do that. Mm-hmm. We just need to be aware of our business. And you find a piece of content or something, and you think to yourself, well, who in my network might benefit from this piece of content? Mm. And you say, okay, it's Joe. I haven't talked to Joe in a few months, maybe a year. By the way, it's never a year. That's a little, there's got to be a hum, if you will, in your networking. But let's say it's been a long time. And I say, hey, Joe, I trust all is going well with you. I was reading this this piece of content, whatever it is, and I thought you might find it of interest. I've attached it here. Would love your thoughts. There, period. Simple as that.
Yeah.
I will tell you that 9 out of 10 times I get a response back. It could be as simple as thank you, or it could be as simple as I was thinking about you as well. Or I find this interesting. Why did you connect this piece of content to me? And then the next thing you know, you're having a conversation. You're going back and forth.
No, I love that, Tom. And that's like the simple stuff that just works, right? It's not fancy. It doesn't take necessarily a lot of time, but you're right. I mean, you're leading with value, which is a big kind of mindset that we have, where these days so many people are just being inundated with all kinds of spammy messages, hype-filled promises. Things just don't really resonate, especially when you're talking about savvy buyers of, advisory or consulting services. One question that I think people might wonder is like, how are you actually managing that? Are you pen to paper? Are you in a spreadsheet? Do you have some kind of CRM? How are you kind of tracking all these people so that it doesn't turn out to be a year or longer that, you've forgotten about them, that you're actively able to reach out? What's working best for you in that department?
Well, I use Salesforce.
Okay.
But there's an aspect of tracking, and there's also an aspect of conducting work, because it's not like I go into Salesforce and say, okay, who do I need to call next? I start on the content side of things. I start on what it is that I do and I do well. As consultants, I think we all know we can't do everything, but we can do a few things, and we should try to be the best of whatever those things are that we do. And so I get immersed in that discussion, whether it be online or reading or dialoguing or, writing books or blogging, whatever it might be. And then again, then I'm thinking, okay, so what people in my network might benefit from this? And invariably somebody does. Mm-hmm. So I crack open either an email or LinkedIn itself, send the message, send the piece of content, and then in Salesforce say, hey, this is what I did for that person. Mm. And that's it. Right? You don't get into a whole touch every 30 to 60, 90 days, you get too mechanical, because it feels mechanical. It doesn't feel right. But I have to tell you something. Ever since I have sort of adopted this, I would say, as of right now, let's not go back because it's taken a while to build this up. I bet you I get as many emails back as I send.
Mm. So it's working for you.
Yeah, it is. I'll tell you what works. Especially if you're networked with people that are good networkers, that's the other thing too. Networking only works if it's being used well on the other side. I'll tell you what usually happens. I'll get an email about once a week from somebody who says, you don't know me, but ... I got your name from so-and-so who knows you. I saw you somewhere. I heard you on a podcast or something like that. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I did a podcast interview last week, and I just remember having this conversation. Then I get an email from a prospect who heard me somewhere else and now wants to engage in it's a change management deal. I then said, something, I just did this other podcast that talks about what it is that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So, an email later, I sent it, and the person said, this is great. I'm going to send this to someone else who that person and I have been talking about this in another company.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months.
So don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio. AUDIO. And Tom, how much time would you say that you spend each week, each month, on these kind of activities? Like, what's your kind of balance between doing the actual work, delivering for clients, working, kind of within the business, and then doing the marketing, the networking to build the business?
So I'll also tell you that I'm very rigorous on how I track my own time in an application. So, and then I run reports and I figure out, okay, am I working on the right things? So
what application are you using, just so everyone's...
I'm using Clockify.
Clockify, okay.
Yep. And, Clockify integrates with a bunch of stuff, including QuickBooks. This is what I use. And it gives me, and of course I do both billable and non-billable tracking. I also use a tool, if your folks are tool people, I use something called Rescue Time.
Right, okay.
Right. And that's connected to Clockify. So it picks up those things that kind of fall through the cracks and all.
And just to clarify for everyone, so Rescue Time, an application, say you connect on your laptop or whatever, you sign up for that service, and it'll actually monitor, which websites you're going to, if you're spending time on YouTube or LinkedIn or in a Word document, and it'll kind of show you that, so you can, the whole idea is get back the time that you might be wasting. Yeah,
exactly. And so then what I do is what's interesting too is a little side note. It's interesting to get the report because it's almost like you feel like someone's watching you and you kind of remember that you need to do these things. So it's a little bit of a sort of a personal governor, if you will. Right. But anyway, my point is I then balance those things out, and let me use categories here. So I have basically 3 categories. I have this idea of networking, business development. Then I have the actual work. And then I have the learning or improvement. Because I am a thought leader, I am an expert, or at least I'm billed as such, I better be an expert. And that expert means I got to know a bunch of stuff all the time. I can't just rest on my laurels on what I did before. So that's a very important part. And I think that sometimes we forget that. You have to kind of know what's going on in the business and who's saying what to who and all that. So given those 3 categories, those fluctuate, of course, but on average, I would say that I spend probably somewhere between 50 to 70% delivering. And then the next and more important, what I see is my learning, my development. And then lastly, my business development, or whatever you want, networking, that communication. I would say I don't think I take more than 20% on that. Yeah. So think of I start thinking of days, right? You've got 5 days, that's 20% a day. Of course, we all work more than 40 hours. So it's easier for me to use percentages than hours. That's kind of how it breaks out for me.
So when you say, Tom, out of each week, you might spend up to about a day on average kind of working on the business in terms of business development, networking, something along those lines? Okay.
Yeah. And that does not include any learning or anything like that. That includes sitting in front of a computer and thinking about what phone calls do I need to make? Who do I need to sell to? Or who do I need to connect with? Or anything like that.
I want to shift our conversation for a moment, because you have a very interesting kind of setup in your business. And I want you to tell me more if it's actual kind of separate units, companies, different people involved, but you have almost like an umbrella company, right? Yes. The conservatory group, but then you have the executive conservatory, the business conservatory, the sales conservatory. So just walk us through, in as much kind of transparency as you can, like, why structure it this way? And are there different people involved in each of those different things? Is it more just a branding play in terms of you being able to offer, but it's mainly just you? Or kind of tell us what that umbrella looks like and those different parts are.
That's an excellent question. And thank you for noticing. Yes, it is an umbrella group. And because there's some commonality across everything we do, and it's the word conservatory. The word conservatory for me, and those that are outside of the U.S. may not quite understand that word, but here in the U.S., the term conservatory means it's a place where you learn music, fine arts, that kind of thing. Because I know in the UK, I think it means like sunroom, something like that. So it wouldn't make any sense. But here and I'm a musician. And one of the things that as I got through older and through Oracle and a lot of this time I spent in business, I always hearken back to those days of how to learn things. I was, and without getting to a lot of detail, the conservatory group uses a conservatory model to deliver on all those business units, whether it be the short-term stuff. And what I mean by short-term is very transactional. Tom, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. And then it's over, and then we'll see what happens. Or there's the operational stuff. I need to learn. I need some coursework. I need some coaching. Or the strategic stuff. I need that 3 to 5 year vision for my company. We use a conservatory model. Now, I have some people that are common and some people that are specific to each of those business units, because what I'm doing is, and the punchline here is taking that conservatory learning model experience that I had as a musician and applying it to business. So you contextualize it. If I were to start talking to you in music terms, you'd be like, what are we talking about here? So what I do is I basically do the same thing on how somebody might learn music or their instrument or whatever it might be, but I use business terms that people can understand. And it's a rather involved process within that conservatory model. So these are nothing more than abstractions to the same model, but nobody would be the wiser, right? People would just hear the terminology of business that they're in.
Right. But when you say that, like you have the executive conservatory, the business, the sales, so 3 different kind of, units, departments, brands, almost within the umbrella brand of the conservatory group, is that done intentionally because you want the opportunity? Like, do you see that clients are moving from one to the other? Like, is it kind of cross-selling or upselling opportunities? Is it because, you can do all those things, so you didn't want to narrow in on just one? Like, walk us through, why do 3 exist and why not just go all in on, let's say, the sales conservatory or the executive, and why have the 3?
One of the main premises of the conservatory group and how we engage is that our customers, prospects, clients are predisposed to engagement. They have a problem. They have a project. They have something. And so language at that level matters. And we want people to come in to that particular, like, for example, for your listeners, and we're in the middle of doing a revamp on the salesconservatory.com, but salesconservatory.com is one of the websites. And if you were to go there, it would kind of sound like a sales place to be. Mm-hmm. And what would other websites that we're developing, we have actually other conservatories that we're working on purely from an opportunistic demand perspective, has that abstraction. So you as an individual are predisposed to look for a solution, number one. And number two, you're using terminology that you're familiar with. And so we want to be able to capture that and be able to potentially think of it a little bit different. Let me give you a real example for you to listen. So one of the things we do in the executive conservatory around leadership is we have assessments. Imagine that. And then those assessments give you some information, but it gives us some information too. Not only that, but it also, the philosophy behind a lot of these assessments are different than potentially you would find somewhere else. Now, specifically, this idea of employee engagement. So you might have heard the term employee engagement. I am not a fan of the term employee engagement. I think we as consultants or practitioners in this world have done a huge disservice to that word and to the people that think they know what it is, because it has morphed into so many different things. Let me give you a little bit of a history lesson, if you don't mind. In the 70s, a bunch of social scientists like me came together and said, what behaviors in organizations occur? Which ones are good and which ones are bad? It's a fair question. The 70s was kind of a touchy-feely decade for social scientists. And they came up with this term. It was called organizational citizenship behaviors.
That's a nice mouthful.
Exactly. However, what happened was, it's really, really good research. I've spent a lot of my time understanding that space, and that's employee engagement. So what happens is, practitioners get together and they go, yeah, that's a wonky, big word, mouthful. Let's abstract it to something else. So employee engagement. The problem is when you disconnect the term from its genesis, its origin, it no longer has any governance. So I would venture to say anybody that's listening that has taken 2 or more employee engagement surveys look completely different.
Right.
It's because whoever owned it decided that it means something else versus this, and there's no consistency in the term. So we here at the conservatory, what we've done is let's go back to the roots. Let's go back to where that came from. Let's bring that research forward. But if I were to tell you, Michael, how would you like to take the organizational citizenship behavior assessment? You'd be like, why do I need that? So what I do is I call it employee engagement.
Right.
That's the abstraction that I'm talking about.
Got you. And so, I mean, correct if I'm wrong here, Tom, but what I'm hearing is you have these 3 different units because you want to essentially meet your clients where they are. If they are thinking more about sales, you want to have an option for them to essentially come into the sales offering. If they're dealing more with executive employee issues, it might be more on the executive side. You used the word we several times. Some consultants have a hard enough time successfully running just one kind of like business unit. Here you have 3 and you're talking about launching additional ones. How do you think about that? I mean, do you have full-time team members? Do you have contractors? How are you running all this when it sounds to a degree like there's multiple offerings or not even offerings, multiple almost businesses and websites, which can create complexity. So what's been your solution to removing complexity and growing the business from a team perspective?
So I do have full-time people. Most of my full-time people are technologists.
Yeah.
And so we use a lot of the same technology across all the different business units. Same website, same offerings, same hosting models, security architectures, all of that other stuff. I do have a part-time CFO. He jumps in when I need him, and when I don't pay him.
And is he helping you with your business, or is he helping on clients' businesses?
My business, right?
Okay.
So what he does is I call him. Matter of fact, I spoke to him last week. We had a meeting, and he helps me rationalize my vision and what I want to do into hard numbers, and comes back to me and says, well, if you want to do these kinds of things, this is kind of the revenue you need to generate. This is the kind of model you should use. No, use a subscription versus a fixed price, whatever, right?
Right.
Those conversations I have with him. And so he understands the model, but I don't need him all the time. It's not a company. It's not a big company. It just isn't.
Right.
Part-time bookkeepers, part-time admin, creative people.
Yeah. So the majority of your team is really, I mean, it's you have a couple of people on the tech side that might be more kind of full-time, but really you are kind of the glue that holds everyone together. You're the key point of contact for your clients. You're the key person delivering. Is that your kind of your intention and goal going forward, or do you have any plans to increase the team, or what are your thoughts? Like, I'm really interested specifically, Tom, around like, how are you planning to scale what you're doing? And maybe, do you even have a desire to scale and grow beyond where you are right now?
Yeah. So I don't have a desire to scale, but I will tell you what I do have, because I have a lot of people that want me to scale. I do have investors that want to give me money because they think that a lot of what I've done, I've got some trademarks, I've got a patent on the table, I've got things like that that lend themselves to money-making things if I were to scale. With all transparency, about 58 years old, I'd love nothing more than to ride off on the sunset and enjoy my golden years with my wife and write my memoirs and books and, that kind of thing. I'm not looking to be a big company, and because I came from a big company, and it just isn't something that's really appealing to me. What I am looking for, though, is I am looking for consistency. I'm trying to smooth out, and if anybody knows how to do this, send me an email. But I'm trying to smooth out the peaks and valleys of entrepreneurship. Right? There's an aspect of investing in different things where something's up, something's down, that kind of thing. But, I don't know how to do lots of stuff. I know pretty much what I've told you so far on this podcast, but it never was my intention to become big, but I do want to be consistent.
Gotcha. I might have a few ideas for you on that. So after we wrap up the recording, we can chat. But before we do wrap up here, Tom, 3 questions for you. The first, when you look at your experience to this point, the success that you've had, when you think about one habit that you've created or that you just consistently, it's part of your daily life, what's one thing, that you do pretty much every single day, if not multiple times a day, but maybe just once a day even, that you feel has had a really big impact on your business or on your life? Could be a personal thing, could be a food thing, could be, really anything, but just one thing that you feel has a really big impact on your productivity, on your performance, on your mental clarity, things of that nature. What stands out?
Journaling.
Okay. You journal in the morning, evening?
I journal. Here's the interesting thing about journaling. I use journaling as a big word, and then I have different types of journaling that I do. I have work journaling. I have personal journaling. I sometimes consider, a sticky note, a journal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I also have this very interesting, I don't have it with me, but I have a recorder. I have a voice recorder.
Like a dictaphone style, like the old ones that doctors would use?
Yeah, but it's real modern, real small. I'd say about a third the size of an iPhone. Okay. You just, kind of like, it looks like a stick.
Yeah.
And it's in my pocket all the time. I guess not now because I didn't want it to mess with me. But anyway, and I have a dictaphone, and I consider that journaling as well. Yeah. And just getting everything out of my head. So what do I do all the time is I do both personal and work journaling in the morning. I usually go to my local coffee shop and do that for nothing more than just a change of place, just get some coffee and sit down and dump everything. Once I do that, and I do work out of a paper journal through the day. Mm-hmm. So I'm not opening things and seeing a bunch of stuff.
Right.
What I do is I have a journal, and it's one page, just like everything has to fit on one page. If it doesn't fit on one page, then it has to be done tomorrow.
Right.
Gotcha. So there's a physical constraint kind of a thing as well.
Yeah.
So journaling would be the big answer.
Okay. Second question, last 6 months or so, what one book have you read, fiction or nonfiction, that you've really enjoyed?
I'm about to finish, which is silly because it's a really easy book and it's small, a book by Seth Godin called The Dip.
Yeah. Good book. Yeah.
So it's about 80 to 100 pages. It's not very long.
Yeah.
Sat down, read half of it and go, I can knock this out. And I just never got back to it. But, my big takeaway sometimes as entrepreneurs, and I thought is that we suffer the dip.
Sure.
And because we don't know what's on the other side of the dip, we're thinking, is this a cliff or, what is it? And it's probably a dip. It's something that's going to go down, but eventually goes back up.
I think this comes back to how kind of started our conversation today, which you mentioned the importance of taking action, right, to create clarity. And that's really, I think, what often kind of differentiates those who struggle from those who succeed. Those who struggle will look at that dip and, as you said, kind of find reason to hesitate or to back off completely and give up. And those who succeed look at that and go, okay, yeah, this looks a little bit scary, but I'm here to learn. I'm here to grow. Let's keep going and see what happens. And then they learn that it's usually not that bad. All right. And then final question for today, Tom, where should people go to learn more about you? You mentioned, about the Sales Conservatory, but what's the one website, one place, if you want to connect with you, learn more about you, where should they go?
Theconservatory.group.
Okay.
That's the umbrella website that has all the other stuff. There's another thing that I am using that seems to be working very well, and I'm open for it. I use Voxer. Are you familiar with Voxer?
I am. Yeah, I'm not a user of Voxer, but I know what it is.
Yeah, and the reason I'm using Voxer, remember I told you there's the sort of the short term, sort of that learning, and then the strategic. I felt like there was no and there's like vehicles for each one of those. Like a strategic, let's get on a Zoom meeting and talk about it and carve out an hour and a half, whatever. You want to learn something? I've got some content I can send you.
Sure.
You want to ask me a question? Like what people were doing was setting up a half-hour meeting to ask me a question. So it's like, that didn't make any sense.
Right.
So I looked around and I found this thing called Voxer, which is kind of a synchronous, asynchronous voicemail type of thing that you can go back and forth. And it's interesting because now I feel as if those three things now have complementary vehicles. So if you have a question, you can go to Voxer. By the way, it's free. Go to Voxer.com and sign up. I am Dr. Tom Tonkin, Dr. Tom Tonkin is my username, and drop me a line, ask me a question, or want to get together, whatever it is. But what I've seen most people is, look, I've got this silly question. I just want to ask you, and I just want the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been really, really nice, because now I feel, like I said, I have different communication vehicles for each.
All right. We'll have all that linked up in the show notes. Tom, thanks so much again for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.